you have young children, you can send them out the door. Most of them are on the way to class with Auntie Lily and a few of our young volunteers. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Let's jump right into our study today. Our study today is entitled Distinctions. Distinctions. We're going to be starting off with a little game. Who likes games? Yeah? Depends on the kind of game, I guess. This one's pretty easy. All you have to do is point left or right. You can say left, you can say right, point with your finger. Okay? I'm going to ask you a question. We're going to be making some distinctions today as I flash some of these photos on the screen. Where's the dog? Where's the cat? Where is the boy? Where is the girl? Are you sure? All right, we're going to be looking at some modes of transportation. Which of these vehicles would you use to fly in the air? The airplane, I love that you're pointing. How about riding on the ocean, on the sea? The boat. And what about driving on the road? The car, very good. So there's distinction and purpose. Okay. How about this one? Which one is hot? Which one's hot? Oh, you can barely see. That's an ice cube. That's fire. That guy's hot. All right, and the other one would be cold. Now it gets a little tricky when there's something in between. All right. Sometimes we're all in the same house. We're all living in the same space. Sometimes my wife is burning hot, and I am freezing cold, and our children are just running around without a care in the world, without socks or anything. So we don't know, is it hot, is it cold? Sometimes it's somewhere in between. But it's harder to define those in-between things. It's harder to make that distinction. Here's another tricky one. Which side has the fruits? Right side? Yeah, that's a pear and some apricots maybe. And the vegetables would be on the left. And what about that right there in the middle? Tomato. Where does that fall under? Is it a fruit or a vegetable? It's a fruit by classification, but culinary-wise, we treat it as a vegetable. All right. So one of those strange places. We don't know. Is it a fruit? Is it a vegetable? I don't know. But distinctions are important. Also, taking into consideration the purpose with how we're defining it or what we're using it for. When you go to the bathroom, you want to look for the right bathroom that you're going into. All right. Traditionally, we always have the men's bathroom, the women's bathroom, and now there's still some gender-neutral restrooms, especially on our college campuses still today. All right. I'm aware of two genders. Apparently, some people insist that there are many more genders than two. Okay. The only genders that I'm aware of are male and female. And if there's anybody else that is able to show me the other ones and give a good case, I might be willing to reconsider. But as far as I know, there were two distinctions that my God made. They were male and female. How about these letters at the end of a name? All right, you walk through an office building and you see a bunch of letters at the end of the name. I don't know if any of you might have some of these letters attached to the end of your name. I sure don't. Do any of them, do you recognize any of these? MP, Member of Parliament, MD, Medical Doctor, DDS, Doctor of Dental Surgery, anybody else? DMin, not demon like, ooh, no, there's Doctor of Ministry. It's funny, it's a Doctor of Ministry, it's called demon. And then you have the PhD, Doctor of Philosophy. Right? How about MED? MEd? Master of Education. MBA? Master of Business Administration. OCT. OCT. This is in Ontario. Ontario Certified Teacher. CPA, Chartered Certified Public Accountant, RPN, Registered Practical Nurse. We got one of those too. RN, NP,
No problem.
Nurse Practitioner, RMT, Registered Massage Therapist, RKIN, Kinesiology, yeah. Alright, so those are some of the distinctions that people put behind their name. They want to be recognized for their scope of study, their scope of expertise. Alright, when somebody sees those letters at the end of the name, it gives distinction to this person. Here's a professional that I could go to if I need this and that. Alright, without those letters at the end of the name, I'm just Tim Corpus, and nobody's going to listen to a word that I say.
I think everybody can use NP.
Sorry?
NP.
NP, Nurse Practitioner?
It's like no problem.
No problem? Not a problem. Alright, let's continue. There's some distinctions also made with the Bible. Alright? How many sections of the Bible do we have? Major sections. Two. Traditionally, we're calling them the Old Testament and the New Testament. However, this in and of itself is already an error. When we hear Old Testament and New Testament, it's aligned with what's called the Old Covenant and the New Covenant in Christian thought. And Christians today, we say, oh, well, we're under the New Covenant, and the old one is obsolete. Sometimes there are Christians today calling themselves only New Testament Christians. They have nothing to do with the Old Testament, because that's Old Covenant, that has nothing to do with us because I'm new. That's been replaced with this new thing. So there's something wrong with that idea of the Bible being separated as Old Testament and New Testament. I would like to propose to you a different view. When we look at the Bible as a whole Bible, it's separated into two sections indeed. You have the Holy Scriptures, and then the Apostolic Writings. Okay? It's more properly put this way, because all of those New Testament writings, as we call them, when they refer to the Scriptures, those New Testament books were not put together yet. The Scriptures that they would quote only refer to the Old Testament, as we call it. The Tanakh is what the Jews call it. It stands for the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. Okay, that's the Torah, the instructions in the law, the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the writings. Okay, Ketuvim, Tanakh. Our God is indeed a God of distinctions. We're still pretty close to the beginning of this year, and a lot of people had started reading their Bibles all over again. And most of the time, people would start at the book of Genesis. And if they don't make it through anything else, make it through Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3. Alright? Because there's so much that's loaded there. There's so many God patterns that we see there. Alright? I'm not going to go through all of creation, but we get the idea that there were 6 days where God was actively creating things. On the first day, he separates light and dark. On the second day, he separates the waters above from the waters below, and he puts a rakia a firmament over the waters, separating them. And then on the third day, dry land appears. So what he's doing here, he's creating the spaces in which all these things are going to exist. Okay, on the fourth day, he starts to fill the spaces, and he puts a sun and the moon and all the stars up in the sky, all right, light-emitting objects to rule the day and the night. All right, on the fifth day, he fills the land and the seas, the birds in the air and the fish in the waters. Okay, so the sky and the waters below, he fills those spaces with animals, purposed to dwell in those spaces. And then on the sixth day, he creates all the creepy, crawly things on earth, all the animals, the mammals, everything that comes up from the ground, from the earth, and mankind. On that sixth day, we're told in Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image, in the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them, and he gave that very specific designation. Okay? And then he blesses them. He says, be fruitful, multiply, all right? Rule over the earth. He separates humankind, okay, putting them up here from the rest of all creation to rule over creation. So he made that distinction as well. Okay? In order to reproduce, male and female would have to be there. That's how God designed it. So in order for the blessing to be fulfilled, all right, he says, listen, this is how I designed you, this is what you're purposed for, and this is how you will generate forward. Okay? He did something else on that week of creation. 6 days he created, and then on the 7th day, we learn that he rested. And he sets this day apart from the rest of the week in that he's doing no work on this day. Everything to fill the earth was done. It was taken care of. All the preparations for all creation were set. And he says, this is good. And then he rests on the 7th day. Exodus 20, verse 8 to 11, it tells us about a command, right? One of his principles. Remember the day Shabbat, to set it apart for God. For in 6 days Jehovah made heaven and earth, the sea and everything in them, but on the 7th day he rested. This is why Jehovah blessed the day Shabbat and separated it for himself. So we see here, Jehovah, Father God, okay, he sets himself apart and he identifies himself with what he has done. He created the world in 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. And in doing that, he sets it apart, or makes it holy. Okay? This is the distinction that he's making, but also one about his reputation. He's identifying himself with the very first way that we are introduced to him in the scriptures. He identifies himself and affirms himself as Creator. Creator God. He's the only one that can create. Anyone that comes up with ideas that invents things, they're not actually creating things. They're just making the most of what they've been given. But God was able to create. He alone has that designation. Apart from him, there is no other creator. We good? What's going on? All right, here's another point that happens. We talked about Moses for the last few weeks, all right, Moshe, and he goes and he's in the land of Midian, and he's tending some sheep, and he sees a burning bush, burning but not burning up, all right? And then he sees this figure from the tree, and a voice call out to him, Moshe, Moshe, and he says, Hineni, here I am. And he draws closer to this burning bush, and the voice from inside the bush gives him an instruction. In Exodus 3, verses 4 to 6, we read, when Jehovah saw that he had gone over to see, God called to him from the middle of the bush. Moshe, Moshe, he answers, Hineni. He said, don't come any closer. Take your sandals off your feet, because the place where you are standing is holy ground, set apart. I am the God of your father, he continued, the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzhak, and the God of Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Moshe is entering into the presence of this being, identifying himself as the God of his fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he instructs them saying, take off your sandals because this is holy ground. What made the ground holy? The presence of God. That's it. The closer proximity, you come into proximity, closer to God, his holiness would infect other things. But why take off his sandals? Well, think about it. Think about where your shoes go. Every day you walk all over the place, and then you come into your house. Do you bring your shoes that you walked with outside, all the salt and the snow and the slush, and bring that into your house? You take it off. You say, no, this is my home. This designated place. I do not carry that that stuff from out there into my place. Similar with God. However, it's not about getting messed up. Okay? It's interesting because God says, this is holy ground, my presence is here. If you come here and your sandals touch this ground, everywhere you walk, you'll carry that holy ground with you. But God said, holy is set apart. And he said, I am not able to bring my holiness to the rest of the world yet. I need to be set apart. If you take your sandals here, you will carry the dirt, the holy ground, and bring it to common places. But God is all about his holiness. He's all about making distinctions. You see? So of course Moshe obeys, he takes off his sandals, he continues to have a conversation with God. And he identifies himself. What is your name? God tells him, I want you to go and set my people free in Egypt, right? He goes, well, what's your name? Who should I say sent me? And then God gives him his proper name. He spells out his name in Hebrew. His name is Yud-He-Vav-He, or Waw, right? The Vav and the Waw are interchangeable. Yud-He-Vav-He, Yehovah. These different images here, that's from like the earliest pictographic prose, pre-Sinaitic era. This is the, help me out here, the different Hebrew script. This is the modern Hebrew script. Okay? Yud-He-Vav-He. And he gives him this name, spells it out, and there's a reason for that. There is a purpose in that. I'm not going to go over every letter and do a word study today. But it's important to note that God gave him a name which he wanted to be known by. Yud-He-Vav-He is his name. Say this to the people of Israel. Yud-He-Vav-He, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how I am to be remembered generation after generation. Now, how many of you, when you became a Christian, how many of you, when you came to believe, how many of you were aware that he gave his proper name, Yud-He-Vav-He? Didn't hear it. How many of us actually heard him described as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Not often. Not often. But Yehovah said, this is my name forever. You know, throughout history, when any group of people take over another group of people, a nation against another nation, whenever there's a victory, what is done is you wipe out the names of all those that came before you. Like here in Canada, we wipe out the names of the people that built up our country because they were slave traders or slave owners. And now Ryerson University no longer exists. We're wiping out names. We don't want anybody to be remembered for what they did. What has Christianity done with the name of God? Was it Christianity that did it? Was there another force before the Christian church was developed trying to get rid of the name of God? These are important questions, friends. Because if you've been a believer, if you've been a Christian all this time, and you say, well, what's his name? Everyone will just say, well, Jesus is God. Well, these are studies we get into. I'm not going to get into all of it today. But how many Christians just say, well, Jesus is God, right? And that's it. We don't ask any questions. We just take it as it is. And we have forgotten about the Father. Even though Yeshua, when he walked this earth, he kept trying to reveal his Father to the people. He was doing his Father's will. He even taught his disciples to pray in this way, Father, may your will be done. Right? He prayed that prayer himself. Your will be done, not mine. All right? Your kingdom come, your will be done. Who are we praying to? You know, we've taught our children to pray, Dear Jesus. Okay? We teach them to pray, Dear Jesus, but Yeshua taught us how we pray to our Father in heaven. And we get to pray directly to our Father in heaven when we're united with Yeshua, the Messiah. Okay? So there's a designation. This is my name forever. This is how I am to be remembered, generation after generation. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Why? Let's look at this today. There's another group of people who believe in the God of heaven. They believe in one God, but they believe that they're coming from the promises of Abraham are passed on through the line of the God of Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac's half-brother. But God said, my promises and my covenants are made with these people, through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No other. That's the distinction. Is this hitting you in any way? Do you see the significance and the importance of why Yehovah, let me start saying his name more, because God is not his name. It's just a title. All right? It's a title. How dare we go to Yehovah, our Father, and just call him, oh, okay, God, like all the other gods. Let's start calling on his name. That other group of people, they believe that the promise of Abraham comes through Ishmael instead of Isaac and Jacob. Let's fast forward. Okay, so Moshe goes, he does everything that Yehovah tells him to do. He goes into Egypt. There's the whole saga that occurs with the 10 plagues. And then on the other side of that, he sets them free and he gives them the 10 commandments. How many of you have heard of the 10 commandments? Yeah? How many of you learned the 10 commandments in Catholic? Catholic 10 commandments. Yeah? The order is a little different from what you see in a Protestant church. Alright? But it's funny because the way that we look at these 10 commandments in Christianity is quite different from how it was understood by the Hebrews. And I'll show you why. First of all, let me ask you, what is the first commandment? It's not a trick question. I just want to know what you think. What's the first commandment? What did you learn? You shall have no other gods before me, right? You've heard that one. And for the longest time, I thought that that's what it was as well, because it's the first one that sounds like a commandment. If you want to look it up, it's found in Exodus 20. Okay? Quick sideline before we continue. Here we have the Hebrew Aleph Bet. All right? The Hebrew Aleph Bet, and we always read from right to left in Hebrew. Okay? Aleph Bet Bet Gimel Dalet Hey Vav Zed Het Tet Yod. All right? So these letters, they're also used to number items. All right? So sometimes if you look at the book of Psalms, you're going to notice that it's broken up with different Bible versions have it, right? It's broken up, and you're going to see a Hebrew character. And it starts with Aleph, and then Bet, and different sections are broken up this way from Psalm 119, right? Look it up. In the original Hebrew, all right, today most Bible versions don't carry the picture of the Aleph or the Bet to number the phrases that Yehovah spoke. So instead of the 10 commandments, because the scriptures didn't have headers, it wasn't broken up into different sections of chapters and verses, the scriptures were just written straight, without the divisions. It's easy for us today when we do our Christian Bible study, we open it up. I want to see what topic I'm reading on today. I need to know what section I'm going to. Give me the chapter, give me the verse. But there was none of this in the Holy Scriptures. All right? It's either you knew it or you didn't. All right? When you study the Scriptures, you know that the truth of that word is there or it's not. All right? It wasn't about proof texting and trying to debate who's right on this particular sentence or verse. It was meant to be read in its full context, not broken up into little pieces. So the understanding in Hebrew was, they call this section the Aseret HaDevarim, all right? In the Greek Septuagint, it is the Decalogue. Deca meaning 10, and log, logos, meaning words. So it's technically 10 words. 10 words, 10 phrases, okay? 10 items. 10 declarations. So I want us to reframe our mind from thinking about the 10 Commandments as commandments, that a list of things that we have to do or not do, okay? I want us to start looking at the 10 Commandments as God's big 10 words, His declarations, all right? His principles for His kingdom. All the law and all the instructions that He gives, they're all based on these 10 principles for His kingdom, okay? For example, I just wanted to take a screenshot here. This is from the Complete Jewish Bible. Exodus chapter 20. You'll notice here we have the Aleph and the Beit. So the Aleph is the first word that's given. Then God said all these words. I am Jehovah your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the abode of slavery. Does that sound like a command to you? No. The first one that sounds like a command comes with number 2, the Beit. You are to have no other gods before me. We don't run into any math problems here. If you take the you shall have no other gods before me and the idols and you blend them together, that's your second word. Okay? But the first word, notice, is the most important word. And it's the one that gets left out whenever we talk about these 10 Commandments. Why? Even the Jews didn't want to utter the proper name of God. So in their Bibles, in their scriptures, Hashem or Adonai would replace Yud He Vav He, the proper name of God. So when I read the scriptures and I see the capital letters L-O-R-D in the what we call Old Testament, every time you see those 4 letters, I want you to remember His holy name, Yud He Vav He. When you start reading it, Lord just means master. Adonai means Lord. Master. So when you read it and you put His name back in there, just see how your experience of engaging the scriptures might change. How it might be enhanced when we put His name back where it belongs. Okay? That's why I read, I am Jehovah your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the abode of slavery. That is the first and foremost important. If you don't know who He is, why would you listen to what He has to say? He's establishing His authority and reminding them of what He has done for the people. That gives Him the credibility for these people that He's instructing how to live. Okay? Isaiah 44, verse 6 to 8. I just love this. I just want to throw it up there. Thus says Jehovah, Israel's King and Redeemer, Jehovah Sabaoth, I am the first and I am the last. Besides me, there is no God. Wow. I love that. He's making that distinction all over again. Who is like me? Let him speak out. Let him show me clearly what has been happening since I set up the eternal people. Let him foretell future signs and events. Don't be frightened. Don't be afraid. Didn't I tell you this long ago? I foretold it, and you are my witnesses. Is there any God besides me? There is no other rock. I know of none. I love that. He's certain of Himself. He wants to make sure everybody else knows who He is and what He's done. He wants to remind everybody that there is no other God beside Him. Okay? For the Israelites, He was the only one. Interesting note about gods in the Bible times. Everybody thought that the God they served, it was for that locality, a territory. So God was bound to a certain territory. All right? So if a group of people come in and they're in this new land and there's a ruling God there, they can't bring in their other God with them because this God has rulership over this authority, over this area. So Egypt, the Pharaoh, thought he was the God of Egypt. All right? And the Israelites, as long as they're there, they're under him. I am Pharaoh. I am the God of Egypt. You serve my purposes. But the Israelites knew that they also have a God that they understood. But this is after what, 400 years of being in the land? They didn't know it was far removed. They might have heard about this promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But how did they really engage God while they were in Egypt? So part of God's plan was to go in there and extract the Israelites from Egypt. And he said, I'm going to show Pharaoh who the real God is. All right? I'm this God going into that land, and we're going to attack this God of Egypt and show him he's not who he thinks he is. So he sends 10 plagues, and with each plague, Pharaoh's heart gets hardened, and God's will is ultimately done. All right? Interesting note. Every plague that Jehovah put out, it attacked the reputation of one of their gods. All right? So the turning water to blood, the frogs, that's a god of fertility, the lice, that's a god of the earth. All right? You have the dog flies that would go in and bite the moist parts of your body, the eyeballs, the nose, all the orifices, and then disease comes to your body. All right? You have the disease of the livestock where they all just started dying. And this wasn't just wild animals. This was livestock, okay? This is the cows and the cattle of the Egyptians, okay? They owned it. They cared for it. This was their source of food, all right? And all their livestock would get diseased. And then you have boils on the body, all right? There's a god of healing that was attacked here as well. When we get to these last plagues here, remember, I talked about the Rakia in day 2 of creation. In Egyptian lore, there's this god that's kind of like this ark over the earth and protects, and from that ark comes rain and everything else. So for hail to come through this being their god, the god was not able to protect them. And the land suffered because of it. So that Egyptian god was also attacked, the reputation. The locusts ate up everything in the land. So no vegetation, nothing to sustain their life anymore. Okay? And then we get to darkness and the death of the firstborn. We'll get there. These weren't random magic tricks, okay, of God. This was him making a distinction, attacking the character, reputation, and the trust of the people that they put in these gods. Okay? Who's going to save you now? These things were so out of order. We've done studies on this. But I want to point out one thing, how God made distinctions between the Egyptians and his people, the Israelites, through these plagues. If you look at the first 9 plagues, or nega, strokes, okay? The first 3 affected everybody, both Israelites and the Egyptians. So the drinking water, the water in the river, that affected everybody. If they wanted water, they had to dig at the side of the river and try to get water out of the soil. Okay? The frogs, it infected everybody's home. They came out of the river and just flooded the place. Imagine, it's really gross. Right? Have you ever had any sort of infestation in your house or anywhere before? Nasty. Okay? It's not going to kill you, but it's quite the inconvenience. All right? And then the lice. All right, this one here, it's the dust of the earth. All right, once again, not a major issue, just a nuisance and something that you have to deal with, an inconvenience. Okay, and this affected both Egyptian and Israelite. Look at the next 3. The insects, the ones that eat the eyes and the nose and bite you. The livestock, the cattle and everything. And then the boils and the sores that show up on the body. This affected only the Egyptians. And this was their personal stuff, you know? It's attacking their body from the outside, right? And then it starts to swell up, and you see this disease on them from the inside. And this was affecting only the Egyptians. The Israelites were spared from these plagues. So God made a distinction between the Egyptians and the Israelites. A distinction between the people. Next, the last three, the last set. You have the hail, the locusts, and the darkness. And here we see God making a distinction between the land of Goshen, where all the Israelites were dwelling, and the rest of Egypt. Okay? Goshen was part of the large territory of Egypt. But in the land of Goshen, there was no hail. In the land of Goshen, their crops were still there. The locusts did not eat their crops. The darkness covered all of the rest of Egypt for 3 days, but in Goshen, there was light. So it's the spaces. Interesting. So you see, with the first set, it affects everybody. And this is just God getting everybody's attention. All right? Because even the Israelites had to learn who He is and understand His power. That second set, it was personal. It was personal. It attacked their body. It attacked their livestock, the ones that they cared for. Remember, we're supposed to rule over the earth and be stewards and managers of these animals and everything else. All right? So this was a personal attack. And then with this, it's more of a national attack. Okay? The land of Egypt and then the land of Goshen. God makes that distinction. He separates the Israelites, His people, from the rest of Egypt. Egypt represents the world. And then, of course, we have the judgment, the death of all Egyptian firstborns, people and animals. Only the Israelites were warned, only those that could hear God's voice and instruction through Moshe. They were the only ones, when they hear it, they believe it, and they obey. So they followed all of Moshe's instructions, and God spared their life because of their obedience to those instructions. They believed enough to paint the blood on the doorpost. They stayed inside, all right? They slaughtered the lamb. So when you look at it, we talked about creation earlier, and then we talked about this destruction that happens here in Egypt. If you look at it, these plagues, it's some sort of a decreation. When you look at the week of creation, this brings everything back, and there's no vegetation. The land is laid waste. There's nothing left there. And the very last thing before the death of the firstborn was darkness. Darkness in Egypt and light in Goshen. What was the first thing that God did in the week of creation? Anybody? Let there be light. And then He separated the light from the darkness. He made that distinction. This is the last thing that happened here during the plagues before the death of the firstborn. After this decreation in Egypt, He takes them out, and they're on this new journey, and they're out in the wilderness. He takes the Israelites out. I've set you free. Pharaoh's finally let you go. And then we see the birth of Israel as a nation, and we see some echoes of creation when you look at the pattern in the writings. And this is beautiful, friends. How did God lead the Israelites out of Egypt? His presence would go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, and it was a guiding light that led them out of the darkness of Egypt, separating the light from the darkness, walking in this light out of the darkness. Day one of creation. All right? What happened on the second day of creation? He put a firmament separating the waters above from the waters below. He divided the waters. We see that happen again at the Red Sea, Sea of Reeds. All right? We see the waters divide. Day 2 of creation. And then it says, dry ground appeared and they crossed on the dry ground. What's that? That's day 3 of creation. God was starting all over. He said, this is a new creation. I'm taking you out from that land of Egypt where you were slaves in Egypt. And now I've set you free and you're going to live this new life, a new creation. And they are birthed through the waters of that Red Sea. They come out on the other side and they see the mighty work that God had done. And they know who their God is. He delivered them from slavery in Egypt. He took them from the hand of their captors and brought them safely across that Red Sea on dry ground. And then he fills his people with purpose. Remember, day 1, 2, and 3 of creation, God creates the spaces. He sets the stage for what he's going to fill these things with. On the other side of this, he brings them to Mount Sinai, and he fills them with their purpose for living. He gives them instructions of how to live. All right? And if we live according to God's instructions, it's good for you if you walk in these ways. Things will go well with you if you walk in these ways. Do you see it? If you live and fulfill the purposes God has declared for your life, there's blessing in that. And he looks at his creation and he says, this is good. Okay? I mean, do you see it? I'm not making it up. It's in the scriptures and it's all there. We read the stories separately. But once again, when we start to see the context of how God puts these things together, how he reveals himself to us, how he revealed himself to the Israelites because he wanted them to know him as creator. He wanted them to know him as deliverer and redeemer because of everything that he had done. That's his distinction. And then he says, and you are my people, and I am your God. Beside me, there's no other. So God always has, Jehovah always has, and always will see the whole world as two distinct groups of people. You got Israel and everybody else. Now, I'm not talking about Israel, just the land and everyone that's living there today. God called his people Israel. And he made covenants with Israel. He made covenants with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The promises that were put there. He made a covenant with Moshe. All right? And all of Israel there at Mount Sinai. In the book of Jeremiah 31, I believe it is, it talks about a new covenant that Jehovah would make in the future. A new covenant that he would make with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. But Christians today say, no, he made that new covenant with us, with the Christians, us. It doesn't matter what he did with the Jews. They screwed up. They put him on the cross. They're bad people. God forsook them, and now I'm the one that gets all the blessings and everything he promised to the Israelites. That's the voice of Christianity today en masse. This is called replacement theology. People read the Bible, they try to make it apply to them in their situation, not understanding the context with what Jehovah had put out there. The Holy Scriptures are the Hebrew Scriptures, written in the Hebrew language or Aramaic, with a Hebrew context and mindset that we need to be able to understand if we're going to see what God was revealing about himself through these Scriptures. Okay? Your Bible study is not going to be looking the same anymore, friends. It's not 5 minutes in the morning with one verse out of the New Testament or the Psalms or Proverbs. We got to look deeper. We got to seek him through the Scriptures and see what he says about himself. Clearly we saw light in Goshen for the Israelites, and darkness and plagues over the rest of Egypt. The distinction, God separated the light from the darkness, and he called the light day and the darkness night. This is more than just daylight and nighttime hours. Okay? God talks about living in the day as people that are aware and awake to the truth of God, of his ways, and they're enlightened by God's truth, so they live soberly. And in the New Testament, in the apostolic writings, you're going to see a lot of writings that compare being children of the light and people that belong to the darkness, people that belong to the night. The things done in the night are shameful acts that we shouldn't even speak about, right? It's like people that are drunken, that don't remember what they're doing. They're just kind of moving through the dark spaces. Back to Egypt. You guys okay? Yeah, I just need some water. Back to Egypt. The ninth stroke. Remember the third of the third set. There was no warning of this when the darkness came over them. This darkness was a foreshadowing of the final death, a spiritual death and evil which was near. This was a darkness that was not only seen, but was so thick that it was literally felt. A darkness far more than the absence of light. Some people say, what's the big deal? So the lights went out. Didn't they have torches and stuff? They could have just lit a lamp. It wouldn't have been that bad. How many of you remember the blackouts back in, what was that, 2003? Remember that one? How long did that one last?
A day.
A few hours in some areas, a few days in other places. They didn't get the power back. Everybody was freaking out. Everyone was filling their tubs with water, right? And things went dark, and there was no electricity, and people were like, what are we going to do? They're sitting inside with their candles, and everything's fine. All you have to do is light a candle, and you have light again. But here, this darkness was different. It was so thick that they felt the darkness. How is that possible? You see, what God did here, he also had done at creation. He separated, he made a distinction, and he divided the darkness from the light. Those four words in verse 21, they will feel darkness. The Egyptians felt the darkness, while the Israelites felt the light. Have you ever felt like really depressed? Have you ever found yourself in a pit of despair?
Oh, yes.
Have you ever felt afraid and confused?
Yes.
We've all been through some dark times in our life. Have you ever been so sorrowful? Has pain ever hit you so much that you couldn't see the light anymore? Felt it. That's the darkness that came over Egypt for 3 days. Lost, no direction. It was so thick that they felt it, but it was also the absence of light. Have you ever driven through a snowstorm?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? You can't see the car in front of you. When there's a blizzard, it just blocks everything out. You put your lights on, it makes it worse, right? It's like, I can't see. Right? You hope the guy in front of you has his red lights blinking, so at least you get an idea of where he is, but you can't see each other. That's what it said in the scriptures. It was so dark they couldn't see each other, spiritually and physically. That's kind of what it's like having a dust storm. The dust comes in and dust filters light. If fog comes in, it kind of absorbs the light. I remember driving home from Ajax one day, and it was still early at night, but there was fog. Fog so thick I could barely see the city lights outside. I could barely see the light of the car in front of me. I'm like, what is going on here? I'm driving down those country roads. And you kind of get an idea of what it was like. It's suffocating in that sort of darkness. And the light is just being absorbed. Yes?
So back to that darkness. I believe it's also a message of reported to the Egyptian that your sun god, your moon god, and your star god has, I'm
Absolutely.
the only
Yeah, Amun-Ra. Yeah.
God. Your God is nothing.
Yeah, the source of all life for them, the sun god, right?
Yeah, the sun god. That they
Another attack on the gods of Egypt. And he establishes himself there, and he says, your sun god is nothing. I created the sun, right? Like, he reestablishes himself as creator. Thank you for that. But a darkness so thick that it could be felt, and they could not see each other. Why am I bringing this up? As each day passes and every morning we wake, you realize that we are getting closer and closer to the end of this world. The end times, friends, is here. And when we enter into these end times, these are dark times. I'm not saying this to make you afraid. I'm saying this to remind you that there is darkness around so many people that they cannot see the light. That there is despair that is overtaking them. There's confusion that leads them following other things, the ways of this world, rather than the ways of God. The darkness is so thick for these people that they cannot even hear the heart of God coming off supposed believers. If we call ourselves believers and followers of God, we need to be a light in this dark world. We need to be shining God's light. Because if you're a believer, guess what? God's light is on you. Yeshua said, I am the light of the world. And then he addressed those hearing, who would hear his words, and he says, you are the light of the world. He's making distinctions for the Father. This is a kingdom of light. We need to be children of the light, learning our Father's ways, learning our Father's heart, hearing his voice, and obeying. Friends, that's what sets us apart. When we live as children of light. What does that mean? It's hearing God's voice, calling you, correcting you, guiding you. When you're unsure about anything, he puts a path before you, and he says, walk in this way. His word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Follow his words. All his words, they're summarized by these 10 principles that we read about in Exodus 20. And it starts with knowing who he is, that he is leading us out of darkness into his light. That was the first word. I led you out of Egypt. I led you out of the world. I led you out of darkness. What he did for the Israelites back then, it's the same thing he's doing for every person that comes to believe today. He's bringing light to your life, friends. Do you feel the light? The 9th plague is just like the irony of being a believer in this present world. The Hebrew word for darkness, chosek, is utilized here. Chosek, an enlightenment, or they exist side by side. We who are covered with God's light live and exist in the same space, and we breathe the same air as the majority of the rest of the world who are under a blanket of darkness. While we can have our hearts broken and weep for those who are in servitude to the Prince of Darkness, we can and should celebrate that God's enlightenment is upon us and everyone who trusts him. Are we celebrating that we're living in the light? God's enlightenment over our lives. In the Christian church, I think sometimes we're told you have to feel bad about everything that's going on around you. You can't feel good about your life. You have to feel sorry for everybody else and come down to their level and pity them and everything else. So much to the point that you forsake the goodness and the light that God is giving you, and then you find yourself depressed and in despair because you see the presence of darkness all around you. There's no merit for us to weep more and more doesn't make you a better believer or a better Christian. We are all aware of the darkness. But how aware are we of His light? How dare we glorify the darkness and give that all the space in our minds? That's why our community prayer, make us holy children of the light. We serve your kingdom purposes. Are we willing to let God set us apart from the dark world? Maybe that's where the problem is. If you're not feeling the light, if you're not sure, you're not hearing His voice, you're not seeing the light, maybe you're not allowing yourself to be set apart from that dark world. Maybe you were like those Israelites that just wanted to run back to Egypt after God saved them from their captors. After they crossed the Red Sea, they just wanted to go back. They liked that life better. They didn't want to see what was ahead. They didn't believe in God's promise that He was going to bring them to the promised land. Our God is faithful to His promises. And if you've never experienced that, oh, I pray that your heart would open just a little bit more, that you would trust just a little bit more, so you can see where He's taking you next. Whew. Notice that only Israel received the light. It's no different today. Non-Israelites by birth, through Yeshua, have been joined to Israel's covenants. That which benefits Israel now benefits believing Gentiles as well. All right? When you come to believe, you're grafted in to the promises and the covenants of Israel. You don't become a physical Israelite, you know? You're still Filipino, you're still Canadian, but you don't become a physical Israelite, but you get to share in the covenants that God made with Israel. Ephesians 5:8 reminds us, for you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. All right, before we close up, let's just look at some of the distinctions that we've made within the church today. Okay? People ask, oh, what kind of Christian are you? Are you Catholic or are you Protestant? Right? Right now you go on YouTube and you see all these people returning to Catholicism because they're making all these claims about themselves and the Word and everything coming through them as the authority. And they're like, well, we were the first Christians, so we're the true Christians, right? And there's a call back to Roman Catholicism, okay? And then there are the Protestants, everybody that protested against the Roman Catholic Church, right? That make up the majority of Christianity. But then even amongst the Protestants, oh, well, what denomination are you? Are you SDA, Baptist, Pentecostal, Lutheran, Methodist, you know, and we go down the list, Jehovah's Witness, you know, Mormon, you know, all these different things. Are you non-denominational? Are you just spiritual? Are you a New Age Christian? You know, some people just say, oh, well, I'm born again. That born again has even become another denomination. And then within the church, you have people saying, oh, well, you're churched because you attend. You're unchurched because you just stay home on the weekend. Or you're a backslider. We don't know what you're up to, but we don't like it. Don't come near here, you know. We need to work on you and pray for your soul, you know. So many distinctions that we operate by that we've adopted, all right? Even in Christianity, there's conservative views, progressive views, liberal views, and utopian. Right now people ask, so Tim, you see a lot of your wife's posts online. Not my posts, my wife's posts. Because she's very bold and outspoken. And she shares a lot. And they wonder, what's all this Jewish stuff that you guys do? Are you guys Jewish now? We're like, no. We're just studying the Bible a different way. We're rediscovering God in new ways. We're really excited about the journey that we're on, and God's put this path before us, and we just want to walk it, you know? That's it. They're like, so what? Are you like, do you still consider yourself Christian? I'm like, what does it matter what I consider myself? So are you one of those Messianic Jews? Are you Torah observant? Because that's like legalism. And they come up with all these terms, and they want to be able to make a distinction between you and them and how you're different from them, because they're like, you guys are crazy, Tim and Bev. And we're still in the church, so we're okay. Why all the distinctions within the supposed body of Christ? Labels. It's important that we remember this, friends. Jehovah made his covenants with who? With Israel. We have none of those promises available to us if he didn't make those covenants with Israel. And it's only through Yeshua that we're allowed to take part of these covenants that he made with Israel. Which means that we are aligning ourselves with his people that he called Israel, that walk in his ways, that follow his instructions, that trust him completely, that acknowledge that he is creator, that he is deliverer and redeemer. Only two groups: God's people, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's his distinction, not mine. Jacob was renamed Israel, and all of his sons were the sons of Israel, and all the promises that he made was with the house of Israel, and the new covenant that he made that we as Christians try to cling to and say, that's ours, not theirs. No. Jeremiah told us he's making that covenant with Israel. The good news, he doesn't leave us high and dry. Gentiles are those that are not natural-born Israelites. Right? In the scriptures, there was Israel and then the nations. Everybody else that's not a natural-born Israelite would be considered the nations. All right? So Gentiles, that would be us. Believing Gentiles get grafted into the very promises and the root of this olive tree. If you haven't studied it yet, I encourage you, go home tonight. If there's one thing you're going to do today, I want you to read Romans 11 with fresh eyes. I want you to pray and ask God to reveal something to you here when you read the Romans 11. Okay? It talks about what it is to be grafted in. And that applies to all of us here today. If you're a believer, you're grafted in. Romans 11, that's your homework. Okay? Last few verses for the day. Ephesians 2, 19 to 22. So then you are no longer foreigners and strangers. On the contrary, you are fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's family. You have been built on the foundation of the emissaries and the prophets, with the cornerstone being Yeshua the Messiah himself. In union with him, the whole building is held together, and it is growing into a holy temple in union with the Lord. Yes, in union with him, you yourselves are being built together into a spiritual dwelling place for God. See this, you are no longer foreigners and strangers. You are fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's family. This was words being spoken to the believers in Ephesus. These were Gentiles that came to believe, and they're being encouraged by the apostle here that you are not set apart from us. We are now united as one, echad, in union with the Messiah. Within the body of Yeshua, there is no distinction. The distinction is made between believers and the rest of the world. Galatians 3, 26 to 29. For in union with the Messiah, you are all children of God through this trusting faithfulness. Because as many of you as were immersed into the Messiah have clothed yourselves with the Messiah, in whom there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor freeman, neither male nor female. For in union with the Messiah Yeshua, you are all one. He's not saying that, oh, you're not male or female anymore. He's not saying you're not Jew or Gentile anymore. He's saying there's no distinction here in the body. You are all one, united in purpose. And he fills us with that purpose. And he allows us to dwell as his family as one. Echad. For in union with the Messiah Yeshua, you are all one. Also, if you belong to the Messiah, you are seed of Abraham and heirs according to the promise. Seed of Abraham. All the promises that were made through Abraham and his family. Jehovah told Abraham, the world will be blessed through you. You will be the father of many nations. And then all the promises and covenants made were made through Abraham's descendants. 1 Peter 2, verse 9 to 10. This is a word for all of us today. But you are a chosen people, the king's Kohanim, his priesthood, a holy nation set apart, a people for God to possess. Why? In order for you to declare the praises of the one who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. You had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Amen? Mercy, we don't deserve it. You know, but if you come to trust and believe in him, oh, there's mercy there. There's blessing there. You are part of his family. Friends, I encourage you to live as children of light. Remember, when you go out there, you don't have to prove anything to anybody of your own accord. If you walk in the ways of Jehovah, and you live the way that he instructed you to live, you will be shining his light everywhere you go. You'll be peculiar to some people. I'm not saying people are going to like you. They might mock you. They might think you're strange. But you know what? If you're living in the light of God is changing your heart and strengthening your heart and carrying you, leading you through your spirit, you can walk as child of light in this dark world. I want this prayer from Colossians chapter 1, verse 11 to 13, be a prayer for all of us today as we close. Why don't you stand with me as we read this? We pray that you will be continually strengthened with all the power that comes from his glorious might, so that you will be able to persevere and be patient in any situation, joyfully giving thanks to the Father for having made you fit to share in the inheritance of his people in the light. He has rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his dear Son. May the grace of our Lord Yeshua and the shalom of Yehovah our Father be with us all.